Chapter 14. Together Again. Peaceful weeks followed. As Christmas neared, both invalids improved. Mr. March wrote that he would shortly be home with them, and Beth was soon able to be taken downstairs to lie on the sofa. On Christmas morning, Beth was carried to the window to see the stately snow maiden Laurie and Joe had made for her during the night. Then Laurie ran ceremoniously around the house, distributing Christmas gifts. A bed jacket for Beth, a book for Joe, a framed picture for Amy, a silk dress for Meg, and a pin for Mother. I'm so full of happiness that if Father were here, I couldn't hold another drop, Beth declared joyfully. Joe then led her into the study to rest. Half an hour later, Laurie opened the parlor door and popped his head in very quietly. In a breathless voice, he announced, "Here's another Christmas present for the March family." There in the doorway was a tall man, leaning on the arm of Mr. Brooke. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Amy jumped up and embraced the tall man. "Father!" she cried, as tears ran down her face. The rest of the family surrounded Mr. March. Joe nearly fainted and had to be tended to by Laurie. Amy sobbed on her father's boots. And Mr. Brooke, caught up in all the excitement, kissed Meg in front of everyone. Then the study door flew open, and Beth ran straight into her father's arms. There was never such a Christmas dinner as was had that night. Mr. Lawrence, Laurie, and Mr. Brooke dined with the Marches in honor of the homecoming. After dinner, the family sat around the fire. "Just a year ago, we were groaning about Christmas, remember?" Joe asked. "It's been a rather rough road for you to travel," Mr. March told his daughters, "but you have gotten on bravely." Mr. March praised each of them. Meg for her hard work, Joe for how ladylike and gentle she'd become, Beth for not being as shy as she used to be, and Amy for her new, unselfish manner. Then, for the first time in many months, Beth sat at the little piano. "This is a song I wrote for Father," she said softly, touching the keys. And in her sweet, melodic voice, Beth ended the wonderful evening with a song. The next day, Mr. Brooke called on Meg. When Joe heard his voice at the front door, she whispered to Meg, "I believe he's come to propose to you." Meg felt her stomach jump. "Well, if that is true," she said, trying to sound casual, "I will tell him very calmly. Thank you, Mr. Brooke. You are very kind, but I agree with my parents that I am too young to get married." But when Mr. Brooke came into the parlor, Meg panicked. She stared hard at her sewing and couldn't bring herself to look up at him. Mr. Brooke approached Meg and took her hand. "I won't trouble you, Meg," he said warmly. "I only want to know if you care for me a little. I love you so." This was the moment for the calm, proper speech, but Meg just hung her head. "I don't know, I'm too young," she said in a shaky voice. At that moment, Aunt March came hobbling into the room. She had heard Mr. March was home and rushed over. "Bless me, what's this?" she cried, after seeing Meg and Mr. Brooke together. "It's Father's friend," Meg stammered. "I'm, so surprised to see you." "That's evident," Aunt March replied after Mr. Brooke left the room. "What mischief are you up to, Margaret? I insist you tell me right now. Do you mean to marry this man? If you do," she added, "not one penny of my money will go to you." Meg folded her arms across her chest. "I'll marry whom I please, Aunt March," she said. "Highty-tighty, is that the way you take my advice? It's your duty to marry well and help your family. But I see you intend to marry a man without money, position, or business. I thought you had more sense." "We are willing to work," Meg cried, "and we mean to wait. I'm not afraid of being poor. I know I shall be happy because he loves me." Aunt March was very angry. She had had her heart set on making a fine match for her pretty niece. "Well, I wash my hands of the whole affair. I'm disappointed in you, Margaret. Don't expect anything from me when you're married." She slammed the door in Meg's face and drove off. Mr. Brooke suddenly reappeared. "I couldn't help hearing, Meg," he said breathlessly. "It proves you do care for me." "Yes, John," Meg whispered. Soon after Aunt March's departure, Joe came downstairs to find her sisters sitting on Mr. Brooke's knee, looking blissful. The scene made Joe gasp and stop dead in her tracks. "Sister Joe, congratulate us!" Mr. Brooke cried. Joe felt a lump form in her throat. This was too much. She ran upstairs and told the awful news to her family. Only they didn't share in Joe's sentiments. They were very happy to hear about Meg and John. Later, Laurie came to the house with a huge bouquet for Mrs. John Brooke. Everyone listened as Mr. Brooks spoke of his love for Meg. Jo took a deep breath and glanced around the room at the happy, loving faces of her family. She saw the tender way Mr. Brooks looked at her sister. Her heart slowly began to warm at the idea of Meg getting married. After all, she'd still have her older sister around for 3 more years.